What's going on, fellow Maplers? I haven't posted in a while, and that's because I've been out of the country visiting my brother in Colombia. I had a phenomenal vacation and plan to come back with a fully scripted positive video highlighting why I think at its core, MapleStory is a fun game with the potential to be a staple MMO. But, to no one's surprise, Nexon is incapable of keeping their feet out of the shit. I'm sure many of you already know, but specifically GMS received a comprehensive list of nerfs identified in the test servers for the New Age patch. This has been covered extensively by the rest of the community, so I'm going to summarize the initial controversy, then go into thoughts on the community response, Nexon's response, and finally conclude talking about the direction of the game and the phenomenon that is quitting MapleStory. So let's lay the foundation for the latest controversy. Nexon was set up for success. New Age has been hyped out the wazoo. You know, every orifice of the player base absolutely brimming with dopamine. So much so that there's a somewhat loud portion of players that ignore the repeated nerfs, bugs, lazy updates, and overall deteriorating player experience. However, this all came to a head. When all Nexon had to do was nothing, literally like an inverse avatar, when the world wanted them gone the most, they appeared. It was discovered within the GMS test server that Nexon had placed a few little Easter eggs to be discovered when the New Age update drops on the 29th. These Easter eggs came in the form of some pretty hefty nerfs, specifically to the global versions of the game. There are three main points here. The first is Soul Urda, the new resource for the 6th job, had a cap placed on it. The second is that higher tier boxes which dropped Oz rings were seemingly nerfed, but this was confirmed to be a typo. And finally, Frenzy Totems, a regular server spawn booster, were broken by the new instanced map system. Obviously, this sparked some severe backlash from the community, and rightfully so. People were outraged that the way they played the game was limited. In a nutshell, the incentive for endgame grinding became non-existent. Why train past the cap on a given day after riding the heels of pre-nerf XP raids and insane events like Night Troop, when now you are also time gated on progressing your 6th job anyway? This in no way benefits the player experience, and to top it off, a paid for booster was leaked. This would slightly increase the amount of Soul Urda you could attain each day for $30 a month. This ties into my repeated jokes about the regular server. Now, everyone including Reboot got a little jump scare of what it would be like. An in-game system was designed solely with monetization in mind. A cap was placed, to the detriment of players, so that players would feel the need to buy the booster to reduce an arbitrary time gate. This is essentially the core philosophy of the regular server's design. Develop a monetization model and create gameplay that incentivizes purchasing that model. And I know there will be people that hate that I point this out, but it's true. It's also completely reasonable for players to want updates that simply improve enjoyment of the game by offering more content. That's what New Age seemed to be. However, Nexon couldn't hold back and the new update was deemed SewAge. Or sewage. It's kind of crazy to me they don't seem to realize that growing their game and creating healthy monetization options will result in greater long-term profit. And it's even wilder to me that people seem to defend Nexon by saying they must make money somehow. Like, you little bitches, worry about having fun and your enjoyment of the game. You don't need to take a stand for Nexon, they'll be fine. Your job is to express what you want to see as a consumer, and it's definitely not this. And finally, the real kicker. This was implemented despite Korean MapleStory not having these limits in place. Now, this is what sent players off the deep end. For some reason, and this also baffles me to no end, there's an almost cult-like belief that GMS must be and should be a replica of our KMS counterpart. So much so that people defend nerfs and poorly implemented updates by imagining non-existent constraints on the global version of the game. The servers are not the same, should not be the same, and the decision making shown in this update, and many other updates too, highlights that Nexon sees the global market entirely differently and has the capabilities to make region-specific changes, which should be obvious. While this works against GMS in the context of the latest changes, this is actually very good for the game. GMS will only get better if Nexon recognizes the differences in the domestic and global markets and develops them in the context of those markets. However, this only works if the direction Nexon takes for each region makes sense. This is where I think the core issue of MapleStory lies, and I'll revisit this in a few minutes. But back to the community response. All the meme responses that have absolutely zero effect on the decision making of a business ensued. The player base threatened riots, truck protests, temporary hiatus on spending, till all is forgotten and the vac pet drops, or, you know, I need to upkeep my current pets. Essentially, all the stuff that says, hey, look, we're little man babies making a loud noise, but nobody really cares. Let me give you a fun analogy for the player base's version of retaliating to Nexon. Imagine this is the Wild West. Back to back, the player base and Nexon take 10 paces apart from one another. They turn around, awaiting the draw. The player has a water pistol spray painted black to look like a loaded gun. Nexon has a normal revolver. They draw. Of course, the water pistol shoots a nice stream 3 feet forward as the bullet from Nexon's revolver rips through the heart of the player base, leaving them dying in a pool on the floor. But, you see, this has been the story of every controversy. Nexon knows the player base is bluffing with a water pistol. The consequences are non-existent to Nexon. So, they happily show up to every duel, the outcome predetermined. On top of this, Nexon comes prepared for the aftermath. They bring a lifeline along to the duel. Like Battlefield, they utilize a defib and magically revives the player base in the form of a Maple memo. The player base, ever grateful for the assistance, reaffirms their Stockholm Syndrome and praises Nexon for the half-assed solution to a problem entirely manufactured by them. Like, holy shit guys, you dropped your dignity on the floor, go pick it up. Speaking of that lifeline, for a not so insignificant portion of the player base, this particular update meant the end of their 2D mushroom journey. Their high came to an end. This was the last straw, hell freezing over, Ragnarok, the magnum opus of fuck-ups, at least for 24 hours until they did a full 360 back to supporting the game. And hey, I'm all here for this. I love it. This cycle is entertainment gold. I'm a bit surprised the level of fucked up this relationship between Nexon and his player base hasn't reached a larger audience. So, let's get into what changed their minds. Nexon released a beautiful statement in the form of a Maple memo, just pure poetry, approximately 4 days after the outrage. You know, let the player base simmer for a little bit over the weekend. Expertly done. To really highlight my points and make this more entertaining, let's turn this into a fun game of bingo. I'll put a sheet up on the screen and link to a randomized version you can use down in the description so you can play along with me. And before we start, feel free to knock off that juicy free fuck Nexon space right in the center. Now let's dive in. They start out by saying, we understand that there are a lot of concerns about information that was recently revealed regarding the V246 New Age 6th job update. First, we would like to truly apologize for causing concern due to the lack of prior information regarding New Age's 6th job content. Oh boy. Let's pause here as we open with an apology so you can mark that second freebie on your bingo sheet. Now, while this is pretty cliche opening and suggests they might understand player concerns, I think we need some more context before we touch anything else. Let's continue. We would like to clarify the development intentions for the parts our Maplers are currently worried about and share future plans. Ah, there it is. It's a hollow apology. You see, it's not that Nexon did anything wrong. They get your concerns, they really do. But they just want to explain where they were coming from. Without saying the exact words, this is essentially the cliche of, I'm sorry, but... And that's 2 more tiles knocked off the bingo sheet. They then jump into the first of 2 topics, the 6th job advancement, Solarda. As we prepared the 6th job advancement update, our goal was to provide motivations to our players for character growth and enhancement, as well as provide content that players would be able to use actively and flexibly, without being limited to only mobbing. Oh, okay guys, you see, they did it out of thought for the player experience. They knew how boring the core of their game is with grinding. They can't have players doing that. By placing a cap on Solarda, they are restricting your options. In fact, they are providing you with flexibility to play the game in exactly one way, through dailies. That's clearly fabricated player needs and reframing the narrative. Everything they said would be more true if they just never included the cap in the first place. We continue. We wanted to consider the appropriate daily material acquisition rate and method, taking into consideration our existing players' behaviors. while also taking into account the difficulty level where newer players wouldn't feel like they would be too much of a hurdle. We wanted to mitigate the negative aspects to the gameplay experience, such as illegal tool usage or paying for services for other players to farm that occurs as a result of having an acquisition method that was mainly focused on mobbing. And there's the fake problem statement, mixed with saying something that makes absolutely no sense. This change would not have resolved any of those issues whatsoever. All the incentives from before are still there. If someone was doing it before, they are also doing it after, regardless of the cap. This change hurts everyone and does not tackle the issue of botting and paid for services whatsoever. You know what does do that? Banning players who do these things. I feel like Nexon references these issues because they know players who do this are pretty much universally disliked, but the action is not appropriate for the issue, and in fact worsens the player experience for everyone. Continuing. With these goals in mind, we wish to lower the burden that our players might feel regarding playtime and increase the accessibility for casual players by distributing the Soul Urda energy and the Soul Urda fragments through the daily quests. Additionally, we added the daily cap because we wish to narrow the gap that depended on playtime between hardcore players and those who could not dedicate as much time to the game. Again, it doesn't make sense. To make people feel like they don't have to play as much, you give them additional dailies that they feel like they have to do in order to continually progress. If you miss a day, you are behind. This impacts casual players, or their nice way of saying, those who could not dedicate as much time to the game before as much as after. How can the definition of a casual player be someone who plays MapleStory every single day, which is insane? The perspective here is so warped. Rather than play based on your own schedule, now you're encouraged even more to be on every single day with even more daily tasks to complete. We can mark this as obscured intentions, misdirection, and omitted context, as around the time of this statement's release, it was discovered they had also planned to monetize the cap by increasing the amount you could achieve each day. Clearly, the intention was not to improve the gap between hardcore 280 plus grinders and casual players, it was to further monetize GMS. Again, we trudge on. We were planning to monitor the actual acquisition time of our players, the playtime, and adjust the cap as needed. We understand that seeing changes like this being shown in gameplay videos and streams without detailed context from our team has caused a lot of anger and frustration with you all. We would like to apologize to our Maplers once again, since the design intention for this part has not been explained enough in advance. Well, there's the second apology. Regardless of the design intentions, we understand that there are many aspects to these changes that you are understandably concerned about. So, in addition to the daily quest that will remain, we will remove the cap and explore separate improvement measures for parts that could be harmful for the gameplay experience. Oh my god. The first ray of sunshine breaks through this shitstorm, an actual corrective action. I'm a little concerned about the separate improvement measures that they reference, but they left good parts in the game, which are the daily quests, and removed the bad parts, which is the cap. I'll give them a W here and mark off corrective action. Continuing. Also, we would like to share that we have no plans to release the Soul Urda booster at the same time as the 6th job advancement update. We will review the progress of our players' 6th job advancement and determine if and when there is a need to further augment the ways in which players can obtain Soul Urda. They eke in a little reference to the booster, and they were very careful to say, not at this time. So, I'm sure we can expect this in-game soon enough. Thought they'd slip it in to cover their bases. They then move on to the next topic, Frenzy Totem. We would like to confirm that, contrary to some information being circulated in the community, Frenzy Totems were always planned to function as they normally do outside of instance maps and is intended to remain the same in the New Age update. There was a bug in our test server regarding this functionality, and we did not properly address this situation before the information was discovered and spread within the community. Okay, so at least they recognize there's a bug, but seriously, why 4 days to address any of this? I mean, it just looks so bad. Back to the response. As mentioned in the V246 patch notes released yesterday, the instant maps are provided during the New Age patch duration for sacred power fields and the way the Frenzy Totem works in these instant fields are as follows. Frenzy Totem effects will only apply to the hunting map of the character that used the Frenzy Totem. The effect will disappear once the character leaves the instance map. So they missed the real problem that Frenzy is a major service in the regular servers, and this massively nerfs grinding on Sacred Forest maps that are now considered instanced. On top of that, this is for servers that are pretty low population and aren't that competitive for maps in the first place. So why implement this here? They are definitely omitting the actual problem and describing it as a feature, not a bug, while also doubling down on the design change. Triple whammy. And damn, I just got double victories on my bingo card. But who really wins here? Certainly not the players. And finally, they wrap up with, "We understand that this kind of communication should have come out sooner, and the context for why we made these changes should have been delivered at the same time we announced them. We hope that this memo can, at the very least, give you insight into how we implement design changes to our service." Like, hot damn, that's an unsatisfactory conclusion. What do they mean at the same time they announce the changes? I think to this day, these changes have not been officially announced, only addressed in this apology for being discovered before the actual release date on the 29th. The messaging from Nexon is incredibly concerning. It's just so out of touch or blatantly lies in the hopes that most people just move on, and to be honest, that's the case. I mean, they really only backpedaled one thing, which was the Erdit cap. Makes you wonder, how the hell did this communication save MapleStory? I mean, I guess it resolved the issue that was entirely manufactured by Nexon, but the core issue is still glaringly unresolved. The truth is, people are so deep into the sunk cost fallacy that they just can't let go of the game. It's a true addiction. Which brings me full circle to the core issue I referenced earlier. The direction of MapleStory is in a rough state. Many people will say this is the best time to play MapleStory. I wholeheartedly disagree. Let me explain beyond the obvious, which is the glaring issues with Nexon and the player base explored in the first half of this video and my prior videos. There's a very tangible problem with player retention. This is obvious by MapleStory's own in-game statistics. The number of players that join the game and make it to 200 is 46%. I mean, that's not that bad. Half the players make it a 5th job. Then you look at the amount that clears Lomian, which is about 12.5%. Nearing the end of the early game, and nearly 3/4 of those players drop off. The amount that clears Lou Will is a little over 3%, which is nearing the end of the mid game with Arcane gear, and another 3/4 of that group drops off. Under 5% of players even make it to 260. This is including plenty of time of having the Hyperburn event, and other Hyperburn events up to 250. Effectively, New Age applies to less than 5% of people that ever pick up MapleStory, and the other New Age boss content and areas apply to a fraction of a percent of players. New Age is not game-changing for the state of MapleStory whatsoever, and the temporary spike in players is just that, temporary. I think this somewhat common opinion that this is the best time to play MapleStory is primarily driven by it undoubtedly being the fastest time to progress in MapleStory, but I don't think this necessarily defines a fun experience or drives the type of interactions that create long-term players. The major goals in this game are bosses. Everything you do is to reach the damage threshold for the next tier, the next difficulty, the next drop. Right now, you bypass many of these achievements in the early game. It's a shame that bosses up to CRA and Lomian are made trivial by the number of free upgrades, gear, and account-wide levels thrown at players. I can't even begin to describe the excitement when I killed CRA for the first time to get the massive upgrade over Pencilier, or normal Damien with seconds left on the clock for those first Apps Lab pieces. Now, a few of them are just handed to you. Hell, even clearing normal bosses for boss accessories was a struggle and a great accomplishment when starting out. These are the experience that had me buy into MapleStory for the long run and support the game. If players are bypassing these critical moments, I have some news for you. The grinds get longer, the progress gets less noticeable and farther apart, and the bosses offer less meaningful rewards. Less people will buy into the game, rushing to 260 and hitting that wall faster, and that's if they even make it there to experience the content of New Age in the first place. I personally have felt that wall, and the 6th job hasn't fixed it. Look, I'm not saying making endgame bosses more accessible and abundant is bad. but rather that the early and mid-game experience have been neglected and needs a lot of work. There have been a lot of updates that have, and I'll generously say, unintentionally made this part of the game less enjoyable. I have individual videos on each of these, the 5% bossing requirements and reboot nerfs, and also one which I haven't talked much about, a push towards bigger and better events and dailies, which all have these unintended consequences on new players that create negative experiences and narrow gameplay options. There has been non-existent indication from Nexon that these systems are ever going to be revisited and improved. We are just stuck with them as they are released, at least for the next several months. Overshadowing all of this is the horrendous QA testing and accessibility issues. Their cash shop is known as the Crash Shop for a reason. Server instability is awful at times, and they seemingly can't get an update right, even when they have 6 months to prepare, for many of them following suit from KMS. It's actually wild. Let me run through a list of bugs I came up with in a few minutes from recent memory. 6-star chapters 3, 4, and 5 had broken tasks and tooltips that did not match the challenges. The cash shop fuck up with unintended choice hairstyle coupon, which they quote unquote fixed, but still had the wrong description. Unintended release of pets into the game, which provided buff to characters in reboot, acknowledgement of the issue, and then the greatest joke of compensation ever imagined. Miracle Time tickets that list dates from 2022, released months ago, and is still unpatched in the game. Sunny Sunday pet box not working, ticket drops from the Spiegelman Ring event not working as intended, Shade's burst breaking, the Kali questline missing translations, amongst many other questlines that have never been fixed. One of my personal favorites is the Princess Snow quest that would constantly break to the point where you had to individually click skills from the skill menu to even attack anything. Then, after years of issues, finally allowed the quest to count as a world clear, and then having further issues with that implementation. Like, let's get back to the basics. It really shouldn't be this bad in any game. Alright, so taking a pause on all the critiques, some things I'm looking for beyond just pointing out problems is more innovation from Nexon. Honestly, what we get is just more of the same. The game is a void of content to fill in the early and mid game if Nexon wants us to just blow right by it. I want to see this in both their main gameplay aspects, bossing and grinding. For bossing, there's very little diversity for the bulk of the game. Pretty much all bosses are narrowed down to 3 types of attacks: falling debris, directional attacks, or area effect attacks. Sometimes there is a gimmick which overlays these attacks, but there hasn't been much innovation, at least until very late in the game, on these mechanics. Just a bigger health bar and new animations. I think one major thing they could add is modifiers to existing bosses with new loot to keep them relevant. For example, imagine if in Chaos Zachem, a boss you only clear for a crystal, you could add custom modifiers like new movesets or mechanics, new phases, player debuffs, boss stat buffs, and restrictions that all add up to certain thresholds. When reached, it would open up new loot tables. You could have multiple tiers of loot tables with gear to fill the many level gaps from 140 to 200, or give an on-drop chance of something highly rewarding like special potentials, flames, or unique buffs specifically against the boss to reach higher modifiers. You know, add something to keep bosses relevant and provide other progression paths than Pencilier and normal boss gear to Absolab to Arcane and higher tier boss gear. This could be done to all bosses. Now let's talk about mobbing. Mobbing is incredibly monotonous, especially at higher levels where there's like one map you train on for hundreds of hours. I think New Age was good at providing alternative things you're looking for while grinding, which makes the cap so confusing, but it doesn't actually improve grinding itself. One idea I had was adding maps separate from the current ones that require a higher level of effort for greater reward. They can experiment with things like map-wide attacks that have to be avoided or you get KO'd, mini-bosses with actual mechanics, you know, optional things to add variety to gameplay. All we really have now is you reach a new map that has greater damage requirements and time gate, so it's more XP when you achieve that. So, putting all these pain points together, I feel like they continuously improve events and dailies to cover for what the game is lacking. Where you might be getting bored of the monotony, Nexon fills the void with more rewards and incentives so you power through. The events keep getting better and better. Dailies are more incentivized to make you feel like you need to return the next day and the next, or else you're missing out. Events with insane buffs to progression like Shining Star Force and cube sales are spread strategically so you feel like you constantly need to save for something. It's an ingenious incentive structure, but at some point you have to think, it only works if they keep one-upping themselves or maintaining the same quality of events. So there's endless power creep, which I guess is part of the reason the early and mid game have fallen off. The funny thing is, the best time to actually play MapleStory, from a progression standpoint, is 10 years from now, or when it dies and you don't have to progress at all. What I'm trying to get at is that Nexon's focus is on player retention. Retain the long-term players of the game and hope a few new ones trickle in. You can see this by the push towards content that only really applies to players already invested in the game and incentivizes everyone to stay in-game every day. This is also visible when they don't even think to capitalize on something like a new server to expand their player base, which I talked about in my prior video. This strategy is also terrible when their continued choices, actions, and communications drive away those same long-term players. I don't think Nexon sees the value of their own IP in the global market, and why would they? They continually erode the likability of themselves, and by extension, their IP, MapleStory. It's not the game's fault, it's the captain at the helm of the ship. I don't think it's ever too late for Nexon to flip the script, especially with such a dedicated player base that will somehow still crawl back to them after literal years of this. What it will really take is someone to take charge of the global versions of MapleStory that actually values the game. MapleStory at its core is a fantastic game. The best 2D MMO out there with a lot of potential. I'll dive into that on the next one. To wrap up, let me tell you what I plan to do with this channel. I myself am no longer going to play MapleStory, which I guess means I'll see you in game tomorrow. However, I have a lot to say regarding the game, so this is not a goodbye on that front. There are 3 directions I want to take with my channel. The first is I've been absolutely loving old school RuneScape's Leagues, which is a temporary game mode that you should all try if you haven't yet. If you didn't know from my profile picture, I'm an avid player of OSRS, love the game, and I want to branch out into content for that. The second thing I want to do is to continue to provide topic videos for MapleStory. I want to discuss the problems that need to be addressed before I return to the game, cover drama because it's fun for me, and explore topics that I feel need some additional perspective. And finally, while I'm highly critical of MapleStory, I still think you can have a lot of fun with it. I want to build a resource to help newer players get into MapleStory and understand mechanics and enjoy whatever time they do end up spending there before they move on. So stay tuned for all of that. If you made it this far and haven't liked and subscribed, what are you doing? Join the party. There are also links to Discord, and if you want to go above and beyond to support the channel, become a channel member. Till next time.